Hey guys, Herman Morris from Alpha One here. Welcome to the Alpha One Armory. We're continuing with our Firearms 101 series. We're talking about handguns still. Wanted to address types of actions, okay? When this can be a little confusing for some people, especially if you don't have a background in this, you don't know much about it. But it's pretty simple once you go through it. So when you hear about action, what does that mean? It means we're talking about types of firing mechanism, the way that the firearm functions. When we're talking about pistols, you're going to hear terms like single action, double action, single action, double action only. And basically, all you have to think about is if they say something like single action, just think about how many actions does the trigger do. Okay, so how many things does the pulling the trigger do in terms of the mechanics? All right, and I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to start with revolvers like we did last time. All right, so let's start with single action. Most modern handguns or even modern revolvers are probably going to be single action, double action. So a single action are going to be the old-timey kind of Western flicks that you remember watching when you were a kid probably, and you always saw them having to cock the hammer before they fired, either with their thumb or they had to rapid fire, they had to keep using their support hand to keep cocking the hammer. That's because those were single action only revolvers, right? So you actually had to manually cock the hammer back, and the only single action that was performed by pulling the trigger was releasing the hammer, okay? That's just one action. That's the only thing that it does. That's single action, all right? Like I said, modern revolvers are usually going to be single action, like I just showed you, and then you'll see a slash, double action, SA/DA. What does that mean? Well, that means that you can shoot it just like I showed you, single action, or again, without having to manually cock this, just pulling the trigger does two actions, meaning cocking the hammer and releasing it, right? Okay, so that's single action, double action, right? You see these in those two versions. Like I said, you're probably a relic or a curio or a collectible old-timey revolver you'll still see in single action, but for the most part, most modern revolvers are going to be single action, double action, just like I showed you. Okay, so what about pistols? You know the difference now since the last episode, right? Now, I don't have a single action pistol to show you here because they usually are, the most common ones are going to be 1911s or 1911 platform type pistols. And I haven't had one for a few years. I sold my last one a few years ago. I don't have one. I can show you, probably I'll just do some B-roll and show you the example there. So basically, it's exactly what I just told you with the revolver. The only thing that the trigger does is release the hammer, all right? So what happens is, in order to make it safer so that you can't just release that hammer very easily, is then you add an external mechanical safety that keeps you from being able to depress that trigger and having the hammer fall unintentionally. Okay, so that is the example that you want to see with, or the most common example of a single action pistol. All right, 1911s. Think of that when you hear single action in terms of pistols. All right. So then, what about single action, double action? So again, a pistol that's a single action, double action is going to be just like we learned with the revolver, right? I can manually cock this the hammer on this pistol, right? This is a polymer pistol, and the trigger can just function this way, which is just depress it and it releases it. Only has one action, right? Or if I cock it, sorry, this doesn't have any. Or if I want to start with the hammer down, the pulling of the trigger will do both. See how as I start pulling the trigger, it's cocking the hammer and releasing it. All right. So just like I talked about with the 1911, if you having a an external safety. The safety looks a little bit like this, where you just basically bring down this lever, and that keeps you from being able to depress that trigger, or from the hammer actually hitting the striker. But and in this case, it's actually not a safety, it's a decocker. So instead of trying to mess with the trigger here to bring the hammer home, I just pull down on this lever and it decocks it manually. All right, so that's single action, double action. All right, so then what's next? What do we have in a pistol that we don't have in revolvers? Well, we have these striker fired pistols like this Glock. You can see there is no hammer back here. All right, so what happens is you have a striker in there that has a few springs and a whole bunch of different mechanisms that allow it so that when you depress the trigger, it's actually doing not one thing. You'd think that, right? Well, I just cocked it, then it's good to go. Then when you press the trigger, then it just releases that striker. So therefore, this must be a single action pistol. No, a lot of people are under that impression, or when they start and getting exposed to this kind of stuff, they make the assumption that these are single action only pistols, but they're not. They're actually double action only because of the internal mechanisms inside, and then the disconnects and a whole bunch of different things for safety. This striker is actually not good to go until you start depressing the trigger. That means that it actually will, in a way, cock it and then release it. You can't really see much of any of that, of those mechanisms, because they're all internal, but that's the way that they work. And so just remember, these types of striker fired pistols like Glocks and some of the, say P320s and a lot of the newer striker fired pistols are double action only. All right, makes sense? So now you know what single action is, you know what single action double action is, and now you know what double action only is. All right, I'll see you in the next episode.